Okay, just to introduce everybody, we've got Scott Fain from the Comical Music blog. We've got Chris from SCNS Live, and we've got Derek from Comics Alternative. We've got Brent, who's one of the owners of Ape Entertainment. And I don't actually know your name. I know the name of your comic book.
Yeah, Hunter S. Zombie, writer for Stillborn.
Okay, Hunter S. Zombie, writer for Stillborn. Basically, we're here to talk about today, well, what we're here to talk about today is our comic books in a golden age? And I'm going to leave it up to you guys to discuss. Yes, no, maybe so. Get down to it. All right, who wants to start us off? Scott? Yeah?
Sure.
Okay.
I feel that comic books are in a golden age right now because of the fact that we have a lot of support going for the bigger companies that are cranking things out and keeping people interested with movies and things like that. But at the same time, we're seeing individual projects on a more independent scale getting a lot of attention. We see Image is booming, about to overthrow DC perhaps as a big company. They're doing things that are really resonating with people, and we see smaller companies getting a piece of the pie. And so I think that that's a good symbol of a golden age because of the fact that you have all the support of the mainstream, but you have people not sacrificing creativity to have that sort of thing.
I think I'd have to agree with you on that too. I think we're definitely in a golden age. When we probably have more media-related or pop culture-related comic books that are being produced on, the various media that's out there right now, from television to movies. And I think also too, like in the next 5 years, there's never going to be a better time to be in comics with all of the movies that are being made in Hollywood from all the comic book properties. It's just a really awesome time for people to be aware of our hobby and what we have going on. And I think also too, Kickstarter is a great example too of something that's, kind of got this golden age started for us as well.
The thing about Kickstarter that I find so fascinating is that, one of the slams against comics, and not just recently, but over the past decades, is that it's becoming more and more of a niche media. In other words, you have a wider general readership that seems to be shrinking, while at the same time, the focused fan base seems to be growing, and the roots to that fan base are taking a deeper root, so to speak, or going deeper. And so, so how do you have a golden age when you have a reading base that has shrunk from what it was, let's say, in the 1940s and 1950s and 60s? Because that's the reality. And I think this is where Kickstarter comes in, because their Kickstarter tends to really nicely and effectively tap into that fan base, the readers who are, for the most part, already there with comics, or at least with media that are generated around comics. And so that helps to fuel the medium of comics even more so. So it's using the fan base that it has, more or less, but then strengthening that from that root.
Interesting. Now, I will say, I do agree with the gentleman on the panel here. Yeah, comics are in a golden age, but for a different reason. Is that it's become a lot more acceptable to read comics.
Yeah,
Plain and simple. Let's go back about, and I hate using the term, let's go back about 13 years. Let's go back to the year 2000. Comics, okay, and then a lot of comic movies out. We had come over that 90s wave, and some really bad stuff. We all remember Daredevil. Even Roger Corman's Fantastic Four. But yes, horrible. Then one, I think, galvanizing event kicked it off, and I hate using this as an example, but that was the events of September 11, 2001. What happened is people were grabbing for something. They were looking for something. And I think, and I hate using that term, but I think in the essence it was a catalyst. Because right after that, you had Spider-Man released. Spider-Man blew the doors off any records out there. The movie was attended by everybody and their dog. Everybody said, "Oh, I'm going to go see Spider-Man. I'm going to see Spider-Man. I'm going to see Spider-Man."
It was in the Guinness Book of World Records.
Exactly.
That's how big it was.
It just blew up, and of course that became the catalyst. You had that, you had, of course, the sequels, and then a few years later, Paramount, you know, a lot of these projects that have been sitting on the back burner for a long time, like Iron Man, which had been sitting on the back burner really since the 90s as a project, you know, it's like, okay, well, we put this up here. Yeah, sure, it's a second, third tier hero, but the effect of that first film just wiped it out, everything. Of course, then that began this process of the comic era film. It's like, okay, well, let's make a blockbuster. We can make it great. We can make it look good. You know, and a few things withstanding. You know, or again, and you know, even Constantine, which, you know, Keanu Reeves is a wooden actor, but still, you know, it's an interesting take on the character. But you saw this Marvel, the Marvel line really just picking up and going with it, and yeah, and it brought more people attention to characters they didn't know about. You know, like I said before, Iron Man was a second, third tier character. You know, that had his series up, then canceled, then re-up, then canceled throughout its history, and then, you know, that energized more of it in there, and it brought people into shops like this, and got them buying books, not just books on the shelves, but books on this right here, on mobile devices such as this.
Well, I think you hit on a really good point too when you talk about 9/11, and then going back to what you mentioned too about a golden age of comics in the number of books being sold, kind of in reference to the original golden age. Looking back, I mean, you know, they were selling books for 10 cents or less. So, I mean, you know, they could sell millions of copies of a comic back then because it was so cheap and it was accessible to newsstands all over the place. We don't have that availability anymore. We have grocery stores, which are much tougher to get into. But I think as far as the golden age today, like you were saying as well, it's what's available, and it's like just the availability and the breadth of what we have now as opposed to what we had then. And then, you know, wrapping back to your original point about September 11th, if you look at, you know, during World War II, it was the superheroes that people reached out for because they were patriotic. It was Captain America and Wonder Woman, and I think that's exactly what's happening here. Is people were looking for something after September 11th. I think you make a good point.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that you mentioned World War II. I was just thinking about comics in terms of a reader base. You know, something that we should all keep in mind is, you know, World War II obviously is before the Comics Code, the 1950s, and there you have, during the war especially, I mean, not only superheroes that in many ways were the driving force in terms of the readership, just because of the times and because what that meant for, you know, America's place in that conflict. But you had comics that are being shipped out to the GIs.
Right.
You know, so they're not only being read here at home, but they're being read by adults who are giving their lives, right, who are risking their necks out in fighting for the country. So when they come back home, they're going to carry back those experiences with them, including the reading of the comics. And so you had not only a young, but you also had quite an adult reader base at that time. And of course, we know what happened after the comic codes, where the comics became quite a bit more tame, and you had, for the most part, a much younger reading audience, and I think a shrinking audience as well. Now we don't have that problem. Along with that, though, I find it fascinating, something else that you had mentioned, Chris, is that part of this golden age, as we're discussing right now, and perhaps arguing, is based on something that is, in many ways, as you point out, not linked directly to comics. It's other media. And I agree that we have the film world generating a lot of interest, if not in the physical comics themselves, and I think to a point that generates more numbers. I'm not convinced that it generates enough or a significant increase in numbers of the selling of various comic books and graphic novels, trades, and whatnot. But it does create an interest in the comic product itself. You know, let's say the product of Spider-Man or Iron Man, these characters. And then that eventually, we hope, will lead to some interest in comics. I'd be interested in the statistics of how comics over the past, let's say, 10, 13 years have increased in terms of readership, the numbers sold, given the blockbuster hits that we see today. I mean, now Hollywood is beating down the door to put out more of these kind of films, because they can do so, because the special effects are there, something that we didn't have 20 years ago to make this effective. I mean, one of the reasons why we didn't have the number of Marvel films in the 1970s and 80s that we do now is because the special effects weren't there. They just could not do that. know. So again, coming back to this question, do we have a golden age of comics if we're talking about the actual physical product itself, you know, the comic books, the trades, or comics in a larger sense of an awareness of comics, and comics as it relates to not only the comics medium, but film, television, what have you?
Right now, I think, and we can expand on that a little bit. I think in essence, it is a golden age of being, say it this way, being a little more intelligent in the sense of, being a little more, and I hate using the term geeky, but it is, as somebody coined the phrase geek chic, hey, it's cool to be smart. It's cool to go to a comic book store and pick up, Venom or Scarlet Spider or Before Watchmen. 20 years ago, we would have had Before Watchmen. People say, oh, no, that can't happen. But, yeah, it's become cool to become nerdy. And, of course, when I was a kid, and I'm going to date myself a little bit, I was a kid of the 80s into the 90s. I graduated school, the mid 90s. Yeah, a guy like me going to a comic book store, you didn't see a lot of really smart, really jockey, hunky guys going in there. Today, I will give you an example. I saw more better looking people coming into this comic book store than at any time I've been here.
Do you count us as part of that? Or?
Yeah, well.
Speak for yourself, I'm gorgeous.
But yeah, it's a different approach. It's like it's okay to do it now, but kind of dovetailing into that, is it a golden age? In a way, yeah, it's become more socially acceptable to do it. So that kind of encourages it. It's like, okay, well, for example, I saw some good-looking people probably buying Spider-Man books here, or getting even, dare I say it, Archie comics. But yeah, you see people just going and gravitating to something that looks, hey, this looks kind of cool on the cover. Let's see what's on the inside. Most of them are probably going to this Vampirella up here, but but yeah, I think it is. I think it's a cultural shift because we all probably have experienced this. We probably all were nerdy when we were kids, and we kind of had to deal with the jocks. They're like, oh yeah, football's cool, baseball's cool, but then in a way, it's kind of sad because it's also this is kind of was our escape. In a way, it was an escape. We would come here to dive into 4-color adventures of whatever book, Marvel, DC, Image, Dark Horse, whatever. And we would dive into that. But now it's kind of more socially acceptable. It's kind of like, well, kind of losing your...
Well, I think it's also a point you put on. The nerds grew up.
Yeah.
We grew up, and now we have this technology. We've got internet. We've got everything. So now we can take those stories that we love so much. Because to me, it was like every boy or every male species out there, they knew comics in one way or another. It doesn't matter if they played sports, if they were nerdy, or whoever it was. They knew comics. And so now that they've grown up, now we've had this whole generation of new filmmakers and people who grew up during those times. And now they're like, now we have this technology, we've got the internet, we've got everything now. And so I think that also led to it. Plus, we've become more, I think you mentioned there, Derek, you were talking about how people aren't reading so much as much. Or the readership is a bit different. And I think it's because as America, we're an image-dominant culture. I mean, you see the Nike Swish. It doesn't have to have anything else. Just the Swish itself. Right there could tell you a bunch. And so I think that comic books have helped with a lot of that. It's like people see now we're images, well now, instead of going to books, we're going to graphic novels. And now the graphic novel sections are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think that it's golden age, it's like we're riding a wave right now. And it's going just higher and higher and higher. The point is when's it going to crash?
But at the same time, there's a bunch of people, like everybody sees Avengers, because the fact that Avengers is cool, it's got all the cool actors in it, Iron Man was a juggernaut. Everybody sees Avengers, but then they say, man, wouldn't that be cool? You like comics, right, Chris? And Chris is like, yeah, of course I like comics. They're like, wouldn't that be cool when Avengers 2 comes out in like 2018 or whatever it is? I just want more of those stories. And you're sitting there going, oh my gosh, go down the street to Lone Star Comics Plano, and you can find stuff that people were writing 20 years ago that's just as good, and it can, fill in that spot for you that you're missing. And so I kind of see that as one of my goals, is to make sure that people know about that. And people are aware of the fact that it's not always just on the screen. That, they can come here and still indulge and find things, maybe in a different medium than they're used to, but in a medium that's valuable nonetheless.
Now, you did ask a question a little while ago about how many comics, how many annual sales figures were last year. In 2012, we were looking, and this is from Diamond themselves, they said it was around 475 million. They reported that as up 14.72 year over year. So there was an increase. Now, was that increase due to the fact that everybody went out and saw Marvel movies and, hey, let's run down to the old comic shop? Or was it an actual increase that say, okay, well, there's more available to sell?
And also keep in mind that, and I'm glad you pointed this out, keep in mind that this is information that we get through the direct market. So, we don't know as easily the statistics that are generated from booksellers like Barnes & Noble
Right.
or Amazon.com, right? I mean, where are the numbers there? Now, they may not sell, I know that Barnes & Noble sells the individual floppies, but for the most part they sell the trades. They sell the graphic novels, the original graphic novels, the collections, the archives and whatnot. So sales are being generated there. But even if we just limit ourselves to Diamond, you say that last year was an increase. I mean, I'm curious, I guess more, when I'm talking about numbers over the long term, so how did these numbers compare to 15 years ago, compare to 20, I mean, I grew up, it dates me even more. I mean, I grew up reading comics in the 1970s. And so coming to a shop like this was impossible because these shops didn't exist. Where I got my comics was at the 7-Elevens, the Little Generals, the grocery stores, some of these mom and pop places. Again, before the direct market. And my guess is that at least leading up to the 1970s, and maybe the first part, you had a larger number of comics sold. Now, many of those were sent back, by the retailers who couldn't sell them because of the agreements at the time. But nonetheless, I think that there was a wider audience than there is now. Now, Hunter, something that you mentioned. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say. I think really that it was a larger visibility. I don't quite know that the audience was maybe as large. Again, the golden age is when we had more comic books distributed probably than any time ever.
Yeah.
But the returnability factor that plagued the 7-Elevens and everything else, the comics were out there. They got destroyed on the racks, and a lot of them went back. So, I mean, you're right. A store like this, it's amazing to walk into it now compared to, like, I was the same way. I bought mine at the local convenience store, wherever I could find them at the time because I didn't know what a comic shop was. And we didn't get comic shops until, like the late 70s, mid to late 70s, I guess.
In the early, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you had like one in the entire town.
Right,
Exactly.
right.
Well, one in the entire state.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think a lot of this conversation really comes down to is what do you define as a golden age? I mean, is it popularity? Is it sales numbers? I mean, really, what is it?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. And it's worth pointing out that, all of us come from different perspectives, which I think is one of the reasons behind pulling this together. We have publishers, we have creators, we have bloggers, we have podcasters, right? Those of us in social media, those of us behind creating the comics themselves in one form or another. And so we have different perspectives. I know from my own perspective, as an educator who has had to, in certain ways, kind of fight the good fight in getting comics in the classroom. You mentioned earlier respectability. It hadn't been that long, really, when you look at things, that I know the very first place that I taught, which is a college in Georgia, I was able to get a film class accepted by the faculty senate, and that was tough. I can imagine at that time, and this is the late 90s, how impossible it would have been to get a comics class accepted there as a regularly taught course. Even now, I would say most colleges and universities, you don't have a regular course on the schedule that's based on comics. Nonetheless, courses are taught as, let's say, special topics courses. And there is more of an acceptability. And so in terms of comics being able to be taught, which goes hand in hand with what you were mentioning, the kind of respectability. Of course, part of that is packaging, right? If we call it a graphic novel, it may get more respect than if we call it a comic. And that's another argument. But I think it's definitely there more than it was definitely 20 years ago. And so in that sense, I would definitely say that we're in a golden age in that there is not only a wider understanding of what comics and comic culture is, but there's wider acceptance of this as an art form, as a means of writing, as a means of illustrating, as a medium in and of itself, and not just something that kind of piggybacks or follows another kind of art form or medium.
I think another big thing is like the birth of the internet's availability. It's like now anyone with an internet connection can actually start up a comic book. I mean, as long as you've got the skills, of course. But it's this one thing I've noticed, like with Stillborn, you know, it's like here we are, we have a black and white comic, you know, zombies are kind of a big thing right now. And so we were really kind of worried, like, is this going to take? Is anyone? It's like, you know, we have a no-name writer, a no-name artist. Would anyone even actually pick it up? But also, we started in Dallas, just in Dallas shops, and we've expanded to 16 cities. And to me, if it had been 20 years ago, we probably wouldn't have been able to do that at all. We would have been banging down, you know, Marvel's door, DC's door, begging to try to get in. But now you've got the 4 big publishers. You got Marvel, you got DC, you got Dark Horse, you got Image. Those are the 4 big ones. But then you have like how many smaller independents? Like we've got Ape Entertainment, you've got Dynamite. There's just a whole list of other ones out there. And to me, if we didn't have what we had now, if we were not in a quote-unquote golden age, we wouldn't have that. We wouldn't have that many companies actually making a profit, surviving, and putting out more material. I think it's with everything now. I think it was Scott McCloud, who's a comic book artist and writer. He said, if you want to work in comics, start working. Literally, just get out there and just start doing that. And now you can. You know, you have a 24-hour marketplace right here in front of you in your bedroom. You know, it used to be you had to get to the publisher, to get on the truck, to get on the shelf, to get in the shop. Now, all that's in your bedroom, and you can sell directly to them straight away.
Well, Hunter, in light of what you just said, let me ask you. I mean, have you guys, or did you guys consider in starting your comic? Did you consider the possibility of just making it a web comic and not even going by, you know, printing hard copies and distributing things that way?
Well, we did consider it. The complication with digital is, there's 2 things. One, they're not worth anything. People buy comics because it's a collection. They want to keep it. It's an investment for them in the long run. You know, if I had Batman #1 on a digital copy, it's not worth anything. But if I have the printed mint condition, that's $1.7 million I've got in my hand. And so what we said is, like, as great as digital is, to me it hasn't caught on yet because people want the printed copies. They want the actual in their hand. I want to touch it. I want to feel it. I want to look at it. Now, while digital's great, what we decided to do instead was, like, let's print it, let's put it out, and we'll make the digital copy for free. So that way, if you buy a printed copy, you can get the digital one. So you can keep the printed copy in pristine condition and then read the digital. And that way, I know some people are like, oh, but you're losing money. And I was like, well, how does Google make 97% of its money? Ad space. That's how internet is run now. It's all ad space. Facebook, everything, it's ad space. And when you're downloading a digital comic, you have to sit there and wait for it to go. So that right there will boost up your clicks and your hits and your time. Your Google Analytics are going to rise up. People are going to see that and they're going to want to buy space on it. So to me, it's right now we're riding high right now. It's going even farther, and I would really like to see how far it actually does go.
Well, you also mentioned something as well. We're talking small press, and I think really the golden age, if we are truly one, I think it's more one of small press than anything. For example, you have a copy right here. Some people can see. This is Sesame Street. Now, 25 years ago,
from Ape Entertainment.
Yeah, from this man right here at Ape Entertainment. You wouldn't have seen a comic like this 25 years ago because of the complexities of licensing. These days, it's much easier to get a product out. You go say, hey, we'd like to do this. I mean, you probably have to jump through a few hoops, you know, sign some agreements off saying we won't represent the characters doing anything evil or bad or things like that. Same with some of the other stuff you guys publish. I think you publish, and correct me if I'm wrong, you publish Shortcake.
Strawberry Shortcake.
You publish My Little Pony.
No, Richie Rich.
Richie Rich. I'm sorry. IDW. My apologies.
We do all the DreamWorks books as well. So we do Shrek, Kung Fu Panda,
Exactly.
all of that. And there is a licensing approval process for every page and everything that goes through. So we follow their guidelines all the way
Absolutely.
through.
And the thing is, but however, say like, you know, maybe 25 years ago before we had, of course we had small press 25 years ago. I mean, we had we had stuff like Love and Rockets, we had Fantagraphics, we had all the, you know, these different companies, but it's more prevalent now because it's cheaper to do it, much cheaper, because I think, what is it, then you'd have to go and set up a deal, get printing presses, you'd have to set time up at and then of course the shipping, the distribution, and now it's just a guy, a girl, whomever, hey, I want to create myself a cool little maybe 20-page comic. you could go out, either, you know, Kickstarter it, or you could do it at the house. You got programs on the computer, Mac, PC, whatever. Write it out and then print it out on a pretty decent quality printer, and then ship it off so somebody have to take a look at it. And so to me, that's truly opening up a golden age. That's opening up the ability to everyone to do it.
Right, and I think the other thing too, when you mentioned the iPad earlier and you were talking about web
Right,
sales,
yeah.
like, I mean, I can speak from the experience of what Ave Entertainment's been able to do. I mean, right now, you know, we're licensing app games and turning them into comics with Pocket God. We've sold over 1 million units digitally of Pocket God. And I can tell you right now, when we did the floppy comic of it, I was lucky to sell 1,000.
Yeah.
So it just goes to show you that depending on what the media property is, that when it finds the right audience, like Pocket God didn't find the audience in the direct market, but it found it in people that had never walked into a comic shop before, but were fans of the games. So, you know, we reached out there, and we're doing it again with, you know, books like Temple Run and Fruit Ninja. They're going to be digital to start with completely, and we'll do collected editions of it in print. So it's a really interesting dynamic to you know, Apple and what they did with the App Store and then the creation of the comic apps through iVerse and through Comixology have really changed the face of the industry and our ability to reach out beyond the four walls of this store to get out to the general public that may have never walked into a comic shop before. And we have the ability now to say, hey, look at this great product that's being created. You like these comics. There's an entire world waiting for you of stuff you never knew if you find the right location.
Yeah, and piggybacking on what you're saying in terms of digital media or the digital possibilities for comics and reaching certain audiences, I think that the proliferation of, I mean, obviously the internet in general, but also social networking options has come at an opportune time for comics, and that I think has done a lot for its exposure. And so you have people who blog, you have people who do live shows, you have podcasts. You know, anyone can create a blog, anyone can do a podcast and get that information out there. And it's a way to generate interest in a lot of the products, whether they be digital comics, whether they be traditional floppies or what have you, to create more of a community for this and more attention toward this. And so it's not just, you know, as much as some people may like to think, you know, the blockbuster movies that's generating an interest in comics for people who have never walked into a comic shop before, but it's also, you know, anyone almost, if you have a library, you know, you have access to the internet, right? And so you've never walked into a comic shop before, you're doing a search, let's say you stumble upon your blog, you know, and you know, you've done an interview, Scott, or you review a trade, and someone says, huh, that sounds interesting. I'll have to walk into a comic shop and check it out, or my local library and check it out.
Or I put a link to it on there where they can purchase it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I think all of this stuff works together. So you know, part of this golden age of, you know, I think all of us in one form or another agree that we're in a golden age of some sort regarding comics. You know, much of this is based on the reality of the internet, social networking, and all that goes along with it.
I think one of the other great things too that kind of helps and feeds this current golden age too is comics is one of the few mediums where you have direct access to the creators and to the companies. You can walk into any convention that's happening across the country and you can stand right in front of, you know, Brian Michael Bendis, and you can talk to him about the book he created. And you don't have that in a lot of other industries. You can't, unless you go to a specific signing for a book release party for an author, you can't do that. You know, and you can email companies. You know, my phone number is on the website. You can pick up the phone and call me. You know, and I'll answer the phone and answer your questions. And you just don't have that in most industries. And I think that really adds to, you know, the accessibility and, like you're saying, with the social media. And like, you know, guys, if you want to blog with the right company, you reach out to them and you can get in touch with who you want.
Right. And I'll tell you what, I don't want to embarrass myself here, but even if you talk to some people or you do this or whatever, even when you've had exposure to things, you've read kind of a lot of stuff, and Rob Guillory favorites one of your tweets because he thinks it's funny. It doesn't matter if you're a stone cold industry professional, you're kind of like, oh man, that's cool. Rob Guillory thought it was funny that I like Colby and the Grill outfit. And it's a cool thing. And so Twitter's really cool. I like that a lot. I like the fact that people kind of keep up with Twitter. I also like the fact that, as far as Golden Age of comics goes, it seems that they're kind of got their eyes open. They're looking for stuff.
Yeah.
One of my favorite comics in the whole world, it's our Blah's favorite, we love it, buy issue 1 here, Planetoid by Ken Gehring. We love that comic, and that comic started on Graphically, where they were putting it on Graphically, and then they started printing it, and now, you know, I think it finished with 5, I don't know if anybody else knows, but it was robot punching people in the face, was pretty good. But it was a great comic, and you wonder if that would have gotten the distribution that it had if somebody hadn't been looking for it to give them a shot. Or Todd, the ugliest kid in the world, for that matter. You can read his pitch to Eric Stevenson in the back of issue #1, and it's real cut, it's really clean and straightforward, but it gets this really interesting story put out that you might not see anywhere else.
Right. That's a good point.
And you're bringing something up about story in particular. Is that, you know, I mean, we'll talk even recently, I'll bring up a good example of a comic that you probably would have seen on the shelves maybe, you know, 10 years ago. It was Axe Cop. It was a book written by for those that are not familiar with the book, it's written by a team of a older brother and a little kid, pretty much, exactly. And they write these really weird, funny stories. Older brother draws on it, little brother tells the story, but Axe Cop's going to do this and all that. And you wouldn't have seen that, you know, a decade ago, because it's that level of creativity, and people are willing to take that creative risk to do something like that.
And that's about to be a Fox animated show with Nick Offerman.
Exactly.
Doing Axe Cop's voice.
Exactly, and see, that is something amazing that you wouldn't see a while back, and that's truly, to me, that does signal, you know, a bit of a golden age, because now you got folks that, okay, if I hypothetically, let's say tomorrow morning I wanted to go out and write, you know, the adventures of Jason the X and his, you know, madcap adventure, my co-host, by the way, in his madcap adventures with his kids, and maybe getting a bucket stuck on his head and, you know, chasing alien dinosaurs, you know. You come out with something like that, it works, and you will find an audience for it. That's something else that the internet does, and that's narrowcasting. There's a term that's used in broadcast, it's called narrowcasting, whereas you're narrowing a specific cast down to a certain group of people. You know, it's like, I mean, yeah, sure, you've had books in the past that have done that. Like, you know, I believe, I'll pick one out of there. Was it, correct me if I'm wrong, was it Brothers Jimenez that did, is it Brothers Rodriguez that did Strangers in Paradise?
Strangers in Paradise was
Terry Moore, not Strangers in Paradise.
Love and Rockets.
Love and Rockets, yes. I was thinking Love and Rockets. I'm sorry.
That's Derek's favorite.
Yeah. Love and Rockets. There's a book there that, you know, was kind of innovative for its time. You know, you had
Still innovative.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you had relationships that were considered taboo at the time that actually got covered in comics that made them more socially acceptable. You had storylines, you had stuff like Penny Century, you know, characters like that, and you just kind of these spin-off characters that, you
You
know,
also had male creators who were writing female
characters
who are realistically proportioned, right?
Exactly.
I mean, who would have thunk of that in comics, right?
Not the people who write Power movies.
Good one.
I'm kidding. Jim Lee's horrible. Anyways, no, seriously. No, but yeah, they wrote Love and Rockets. It was a great book. It's still a great book. I mean, it's one of those books now, speaking of digital distribution, I mean, they are putting all of them out now for a new generation of people to read and get inspired. See, that's what I love about this digital era, is that I could go back and I could find an Adventures of Superman from 1987 that I haven't read. I could pull it on my iPad. I could read it at home, pay him the, what is it, $2 and whatever to read it, and keep it. Now that's but however, there is that.
You're talking about someplace like on Comixology.
Comixology, DC Comics app, things like that.
Yeah.
But the only flip side of that is, and we were talking about this a while ago, is the floppy right there.
Yeah.
Is that you have that comic book in your hand. And I mean, I will say that DC, Marvel, a few other of the primaries, the big labels have gotten smart with that. Said, yeah, here, we'll sell you this, plus we'll sell you a digital copy to go along with it.
Right.
And you know, it is a smart marketing move. It's shrewd.
Yeah.
It definitely is. I think one of the other things, like as a publisher, that I have to look for when I'm looking at properties and how I'm doing things are generational trends.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the big things that they're noticing with the millennials, which is the current generation, is that the way that they consume media is through their device, because they're the first generation to have never not had the internet. They've had it since the day they were born. So they've got the phone, they have their iPad, they have their MacBook. and they consume their media digitally. They aren't concerned about having a physical copy as long as they can get it when they want it and read it. So I mean, I look at those kind of things when I'm getting ready to do stuff. If I'm going to do it digital or if I'm going to do it in print, and that's, you know, again, it's we love the floppy book because we grew up with that, and that's what we know. They love the digital because that's what they grew up with.
Right.
So it's not that we're picking one over the other. We're producing both, you know, so that we're hitting both markets. Or both markets.
And if you want a floppy, oh, there it comes.
No, go ahead.
If you want if you want a floppy, that sounds weird. If you want a floppy issue, you can also go and you can piece it together. Like, I don't want to sound like a homer, but mycomicshop.com, they've got a whole bunch of stuff where you can put it together. I remember I was trying to write a blog about The Authority, and I couldn't find it because, you know, they're putting it back together in collected edition, and I couldn't find it anything other than issues. And so I pieced it out on from mycomicshop.com on the blog, and it was only like maybe it was like $19 or something for the first arc, and it was a little bit more. Then me and Hal, we go to Half Price Books, and we found the whole thing there too, the whole run. But maybe missing one or two, but then you piece that together at a Lone Star for $3 or $4, and you figure it out. So. Yeah, I understand though. Digital is obviously the way that things are kind of going.
Yeah. And a couple of you have mentioned older comics. You say, you know, classic issues of Superman, or going back and finding the back issues of The Authority. I mean, that brings up another issue involved in this question that we're addressing. You know, are we in a golden age? And it's one of more of an institutional, speaking of the medium, awareness of what came before. And I think that this is important. Primarily what I think we've been discussing is where things are now, and one of the things that we've said that makes this such a golden age is the fact that, as you mentioned, many people can create a comic when they didn't have the opportunity or the platform to do so before. There's more of a means. You know, we were discussing digital as a way for individuals to create comics who may not have had that opportunity before, a way of skirting the big boys, so to speak, the publishers, not to do it on your own, DIY. At the same time, there's something that is kind of working in the opposite direction, and that is not so much of an awareness of the stuff that's possible now, but things that were done in the past. Now, my colleague at the Comics Alternative, who wasn't able to join us through the wonders of Skype, he had something else going on this evening, has said on our podcast a couple of times, and I think he's right here. He said, I think we're in a golden age of archives and collections.
Absolutely.
We have right now, and I'm not even talking about nice hardback editions, but you know, paperbacks as well. In fact, you can look at this wall over here, and there are so many examples of this. I mean, you have the Marvel omnibus editions, but you also have a variety of collections. I mean, just recently on the podcast, or the Comics Alternative podcast, we did what we call our Yo Show. We looked at a couple of recent archival collections edited by Craig Yo, who does this kind of stuff. And he's just one example of the kind of comics or collections that are being produced right now. These older comics that are lost to not only, you know, readers today who may not know of a lot of these older comics, but people, you know, older readers who, I used to have these comics once, I sold them, I don't have them anymore. Now, eventually, they will all come back, I think, in these archive collections. And what that means is we have a medium that is very much aware of itself and of its history. And I think that that leads to this sense of sophistication. Again, what it means to be in a golden age. You understand your place as a medium, what came before, and then what is possible now. I think all of that goes hand in hand.
Yeah, and to add to that point, I mean, just to kind of give you a rough idea, there used to be a point in time when we first got VCRs and stuff that, like a great television show, like say for example, Buffy the Vampire Slayer came out. And if I didn't get to watch that show or my favorite sci-fi show, I was like, man, I'm never going to see this again. And then, you know, here we are, fast forward 15, 20 years, anything that was on television that you want to see, you can pretty much find on DVD or on the internet. And we are reaching that critical point in comics now where anything that was printed in the past is about out in trade. If not, you can find an archival edition, you can find, like you're saying, in trade paperbacks. And I think we really have to thank DC Comics because they're the one that started the whole trade paperback, you know, movement and creating this backlisted product. And it's giving us what you're saying now is this great, just tremendous, you know, allotment of books here that just are the entire history of everything that we've ever done. So we don't have to kind of worry about missing it. Like you were saying as well, you can find it, you can piece it together. It's out there. Nowadays I don't worry about missing an issue because I know I'll be able to find it either in trade or I'll find that issue somewhere else. So.
And there's even, I don't think we should necessarily delve into that, but there's even an underground archive trade, so to speak, where people share these things on the internet.
Oh, yeah.
And it is pirating, so if that's the only way in which you get your comics, you got to watch out. On the other hand, there are many, many things that are out of print that people have scanned for posterity's sake and to share with others. And so sometimes that may be the only way of finding these older, out-of-print, may never be collected kind of comics.
I'm going to make a shocking admission here. I've used technology for evil. But no, seriously.
Everybody has.
Yes.
I just don't admit it.
Yeah, well, slap the cuffs on me. No, anyways, there was a series of Elseworld books that came out in the 90s. It was like, I believe it was I'm trying to remember, I don't know if it was a Wonder Woman or a Superman book. I can't remember the exact story, but it was involving, I think it was all the jungle kind of, I think it was a Wonder Woman book, Amazonian book, Superman was in it, things like that. One that you really just can't find, it's out of print. You go on to a sharing site like a BitTorrent or something like that, and find it. You can download the whole thing. It's less than maybe 100 meg file. It's all PDF, and you can read it on your computer, your laptop, your iPad, whatever. And I mean, yes, it is. How would I say this? It's not good to do. I don't believe. Just to give a disclaimer. I don't condone anything like that.
Kids, don't do this at home.
Please don't do it at home. Don't come back because I don't want to get sued. But seriously, yeah, that is a way a lot of people have been able to find some like these really awesome '90s titles that like DC had. Now, the good news is eventually they probably will come back around. You'll start seeing them on Comixology or the DC Comics app or things of that nature. But it's going to take the push of the community to get it out there.
Yeah. Well, there is a negative side.
Yeah.
Like I said, look, any comic book that comes out within 2 days, it's on the internet.
Yeah.
For free. Period. It doesn't matter what it is. It's out there. And but what I think about with that, which is one of the reasons why we did free, we're like, if they're just going to pirate, why don't we just give it away for free and they can come to our website and get it legally?
Exactly.
Especially since we're small beans, so it's perfectly all right. But even with that, the sales are still rising. The crowd is still growing. And it's like, okay, I went and I read, Walking Dead 100 on the internet. But now I want to go buy it. Now I actually want to go get it. Now I actually want to go, I'll start following the series. So as much as it's a negative, it's also a small bit of a positive that helps push people and bring them back around.
And there are creators too, like Mark Waid, I think is what he said, that he encourages people to go out and do that with some of his product. They want people to go out and get the book, get it accessible, get it out there to as many people as they can. It broadens the audience, it gets people interested, and if it brings them into the stores, and what I found is if they like it and you like it digitally, they want a copy of it. They want to hold it in their hands. So even though you've got it for free, you're going to buy it 9 times out of 10, I would think.
Like Walking Dead 100, I got because they did the issues. Well, I've got 5 or 6 at home.
Then you got the thing. I was listening to the Comics Alternative this morning while I was doing manual labor.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. But no, you've got Private Eye, right? Isn't that by Marcos Martin and Brian K. Bond? They dropped it on the industry. It's only got a little bit, and they put it as a what's the technical term? I think it's called Pay What You Will, or what's the band? What's the band name? Radioheading it.
Yes.
So they put it out there, and they say that the sales for that book, or you said the sales for that book, are going really well. And that was on the internet, and it was a Pay What You Want, and people are excited about number 2, and so that's working in a different sort of way than the other ideas. And Mark Waid's doing Thrillback now, whatever that is.
Oh yeah, that's great.
And so that gets into an interesting question too about Pay What You Want, Radiohead, doing like that. In essence, because some folks, we'll be honest, don't want to go pull $3, $4, $5 out of their pocket to go down to their local comic retailer and buy one book. I remember the days, and of course you mentioned it earlier, I remember the days when you could go out and buy a Spider-Man comic for 75 cents, $1, $1.50. I remember Spider-Man 250, which I still have. I think it was like it was like 75 cents or $1. And now that these prices have just gone up with all these books, I mean, do you think in essence, pay what you will is, do you think it's a sustainable business model? Do you think we're always going to have people who are going to pull out $20 to get 4 books at your local store? I mean, what do you honestly think?
Honestly, I think that pay what you will is still relatively new for the comic industry.
Right.
I think it will, but in essence, that's what Kickstarter is.
Right.
You're going out and you're asking people invest in me and invest in my project and pay what you can afford based on the structure I've set up here. And Kickstarter is just, it's exploding with the number of comics and especially things like what was it? Order of the Stick.
Mm-hmm.
Over $1 million they made, for the reprint of their trade, and that was just them asking people to support their product. So I think that in the right circumstance, pay what you will definitely will work. But again, it's going to come down to you've got to have the name and the exposure to get it out to enough people, so that that you can afford to get people, enough people to pay what they will in order to make it work.
Brian K. Vaughan's a pretty big name.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
absolutely, and that's why it works.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the things that both Andy and I think, commented on in that episode from last week is, had it not been Brian K. Vaughan, it wouldn't have the same impact. So it was the name that brought him in.
Yeah.
But I think by lending his presence, his name recognition to this endeavor, it legitimizes, or not legitimizes, but it strengthens the legitimacy, I guess, of this kind of way of getting the comic out in a way that some Joe Schmo who no one knows doing it wouldn't have the same effect.
Let me ask you guys a question. What do you think in regards to like a Kickstarter campaign of an individual, like say Brian K. Vaughan doing his project versus a company like Top Cow coming in and doing a Kickstarter project or something like Cyberforce that they did? Do you feel any? What are your thoughts there?
Good question. Now, I'll give an example because both my co-host and I know someone who did a recent Kickstarter. Ken Lowry and Robert Wilson IV actually did a recent Kickstarter for a book, just a one-shot ghost story book called Like a Virus, which they've made already their money. But interesting side story involving them getting scammed in Indiegogo. It's really weird. You'll have to read it. It's on Comics Alliance as long as that's still up. But no, with Kickstarter, with this type of stuff, yeah, I myself, I would rather I'll pick a name like Ken or a Ben Temple Smith or someone like that writing coming saying, hey, I'm an independent writer, I want to do it this way. I would feel more inclined to giving them my money because they're doing it as a one-man operation than say, oh, Top Cow, hey, we're going to put together a new anthology of a new book. To me, that kind of rubs me wrong a little bit. It's like, because really to me, like a Top Cow, yeah, they are a company, but still, they should find the finances to do that, not have to go out on an Indiegogo, a Kickstarter, and say, hey, we want your money to develop a product. So, but however, if it was like an independent artist, says I'm going to draw maybe a one-shot book or an anthology, I was like, yeah, I'll kick in $5, $10, $20.
I think it would probably be smarter is if the individual came out with the book and then said that Top Cow told us if we did this much or if we got this much, they would consider us for a publish. So I think that would be a little bit easier. That would be better because then you're supporting a rising star.
Well, I know that's happening right now. Like a good friend of mine, Renee DeLiz. She's doing a Peter Pan graphic novel that's coming out, and she has IDW already ready to publish the book for them once she's done it. But it's all through her, and I mean, she's raising all the funds so that she can devote her time to do it. IDW simply stepped in and said, once you've achieved your goal and you have the project finished, we will take on the publishing responsibilities for it.
See, now I'm okay with that.
Yeah, me too.
That
works. Yeah, and that's like Jamal Igle with Molly Danger, and Molly Danger was part of Free Comic Book Day. That's being published by Action Lab.
Yeah.
But it started off as a successful Kickstarter campaign. Now, I'm curious, Brent, when you asked this question, I mean, is this something that Ape has considered working as a publisher?
We've actually done 2 Kickstarters already.
Oh, okay.
But what we did is we did it this exact same way that like IDW did it with Renee. We worked with Ben Licious for the Black Coat because he wanted to do a new series. Ben put the entire Kickstarter together. We helped back him by just being there to support, put it out on Facebook and Twitter, let people know what's going on. Ben raised all the money. Ben's creating all the product, and when he's ready to go to press, we'll take it to press for him. And we'll distribute it, take all the distribution. We did it for that, and then for another book called Free Mars that we've done. So we've been involved in 2 successful Kickstarters right now. You know, not again where the money's coming to us,
but through the creator,
yeah,
not
through the creator,
publisher.
right? Yeah, and I think that's the best way to do it.
Yeah,
I mean, I personally have a project that I want to do that I plan to kickstart, and you know, if I get it funded, I'm going to pay my artists, pay my writers that way, and I'll probably publish it through Ape.
And another example of how we may be in some kind of golden age in that there are different avenues for people to get product out or to get people interested in it. You know, we mentioned Kickstarter earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it comes back to that.
It's true.
There's this guy I really like. I met him on Facebook. Somehow I made friends with Ross Ritchie on Facebook and had no idea who he was. I thought he was just some guy who read my blog. I was like, okay, I'll take that. It'll go nice with my other 15 followers. And and then one day I was like, oh man, do you publish Boom? He's like, yeah. And I was like, that is so cool. Thank you for legitimizing me here. I appreciate that. And he was like, oh, no problem, man. It's cool to know you.
Legitimize you to the other 14 people.
Yeah, I know. I'm building quite a reputation with my 20-something fan base. But anyways, I was talking to Ross, and I met this guy who's done like 5 Kickstarter campaigns.
Wow.
And every single one he does really good. He puts it all out nicely. It's all very professional, and it just fails miserably. And he's the nicest guy ever, and he's unflappable. He has the spirit to keep going with the Kickstarter thing. And so I wonder if somebody came in and said, hey, it's kind of an ape-looking book. If he put that on there, if that would help him boost, because you know Kickstarter has kind of a punk rock kind of heart to it. It's got a little spirit. I wonder if you know, he could say something like, hey, Ape said they would publish my book. If that would help in that case.
You know, I think it would, because I mean, honestly, one of the things about Kickstarter, and I think it's with anything like this when you crowdsource or crowdfund anything, is you're putting, you know, your money and your trust into that person to be able to take care of it and get it done. And one of the things I think a lot of creators don't realize is there's so much that happens once the product is created on the back end of it, as far as getting it to the printer, getting it printed, the logistics of shipping, getting it to Diamond, solicitations and advertising. There's a whole world back there of stuff that, believe me, is a monster to have to deal with. And once you've done all that and the first issue comes out, then you have to start marketing and promoting the book, which I'm sure we talked about earlier today. And I think whenever you have, like on a Kickstarter campaign, when some company says, hey, I'm going to do this, and then Ape Entertainment's going to publish it for me, it adds that extra layer of legitimacy to go, this is a company that's been around for 10 years, and if they say they're going to publish this book, you know, once it's done, then I know it's going to actually be published and come out.
So it can go both ways, kind of.
Yeah, I think it can. And then there's a lot of people too that have successfully done their books. I mean, I've kicked back to Kickstarter programs where I didn't know who the person was at all, and I've got this amazingly gorgeous book at the end. So I mean, it's as with anything that you do, it can go either direction depending on what's involved.
And some people are using Kickstarter to make those collections. Bob Burden, he does that with the Flaming Carrot, where he puts it on Kickstarter, and then people sign up for it, and then it makes the collected books. And he signs them, and he's real cool about it. So.
Believe me, man, I kickstarted one called, I think it was the Monster Guide, and it's these animators in this giant monster book. And they put out a book that I got in, and I'm like, man, I wish I could produce a book that looked this good. They had me jealous. It was that good.
Well, and also, I kind of going back to something we were talking about earlier about golden age and more accessibility, especially with social media, it's people now are finding partners to work with. In particular, let's just say, well, oh God, I'm going to keep going back in history here. Let's say we go back about 30 years. Let's bring up Harvey Pekar. A guy like Harvey Pekar, American Splendor. Okay, Harvey basically could write a good story. Could tell a story about going out and getting a pair of shoes, or having to work at the VA office. But the man could write stories, but he couldn't draw worth a flip. So he would get guys, people you knew, Robert Crumb and other artists that he worked with, and they basically put these anthologies together. And it took a while to put them together. Now, if hypothetically I say I'm writing a book, I say, hey guys, I'm looking for somebody to get my ink for me or can help me draw it out, sketch the ideas out. And then you can do something like that, then go to, with some samples of work to a Kickstarter at Indiegogo and say, hey, here's my idea. We want to put this together, we want to publish it, do a small, maybe 1,000 issue run or something, or 500 issues or 500 copies or whatever, and we'll give you this and that. It seems to work better than it used to. And that's one thing going back to it, we are in a golden age. We're in a golden age of independence, especially with art, with that. And we could bring in, more people could come into the game, whereas it used to be an exclusive club. You had to know somebody, had to know the secret word to get in the door. Now, you can find a dude 2 blocks from you that can sketch the hell out of something, or could write a really good comic script for you. That's what I love about it now. Sorry, I'm just getting crazy.
No, you bring up some really good points.
Yeah.
I think the other thing too we need to look back at as well is the black and white boom of the 80s.
Right.
Because that right there, that particular era in the 80s when we had all these black and white comics coming out, that's when people discovered, hey, wait a minute. I don't have to be Marvel, I don't have to be DC. I can go to my local printer down here and these guys can make a black and white comic for me and I can get it distributed. And we were still in a relative early phase of the direct market when you had Diamond and Capital City and a lot of Friendly Franks, a lot of other distributors around, and they were looking for more product. Stores needed something to fill the shelves. And when the 80s, with that boom of product, it's what kind of just like lit the fuse as far as I'm concerned, to create this, golden age we're in now of accessibility and content.
And along with what you guys are saying here, I can't help but think that another thing that lends credence to this thought that we're in a golden age for comics, and it goes hand in hand with what you've been saying, is that what we understand as comics now is not what we understood as comics 20, 30 years ago. Primarily when it comes to issues of genre. Again, I can look at this wall here of the comics that they have on display, and the vast majority are going to be superhero related. But we all know that now there are more and more comics, many if not most, created by the smaller mom and pop, indie publishers that are publishing, some superhero-ish type of comics, but also other kind of comics. Now, when it comes right down to it, there have always been multi-genres within comics, right, from the very beginning. Right. Funny animal stories, there's the superheroes, there's the romance, there's the crime, there's the mystery, there's the gore, there's all of that. But I think we're getting back to more I guess a varied way of looking at comics. It's not just the superhero stuff, and then along with that, it's not only particular genres, but also particular packaging. We've been talking primarily about the floppies, the comic books themselves. They're the original graphic novels. They're the more quote-unquote literary books that, tend to be taught in a lot of college classrooms. Okay, these are comics just as well. Some may deal with superheroes, some may deal with a variety, real-life stories. You mentioned Harvey P. Carr.
Right.
I think that those kind of autobiographic comics have much more legitimacy now than they did 15, 20 years ago, or at least much more of an awareness of what these are now, and more people are doing them. And many of these kind of comics are being generated by independents. The mini comic craze is primarily based on, in many ways, I think, this kind of autobiography, memoir kind of writing.
Like our Bloodstained Roof, isn't that what it's called? The one about the ducks that fly on the roof that just got nominated for an Eisner, the webcomic?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, well, it's this really sweet story, and somebody randomly that I didn't even know shared it on Facebook, and I read it and I looked and I said, this is comics, even though it's just kind of scrolling, and it just looked really nice, and it looked like it was independently done, just like a one-man kind of operation, but it was really good, and I enjoyed it a great deal. And come to find out, it's on the Eisner list. And I was surprised, and I went back and looked, and I said, "Oh, I've seen that before. That's that thing with the crazy watercolors."
You mentioned the ice creams. The thing that, in fact, last week's episode of the Comics Alternative was partially devoted to this. The thing about this year's or the 2013 nominees is that it's a very different looking list from the previous years. In that you find a lot of independent, non-mainstream creators, publishers represented on that list. Which I find very exciting.
Absolutely.
And I think that maybe is another indication that, where we're at right now in terms of our understanding of comics is quite a bit different than previous.
Oh, yeah. Well, all right, there we go. Okay.
And now a word from the zombie.
Don't say the Z word, that's insulting.
I'll apologize.
Come
I'm
on,
dead.
Well,
I'm
you
dead.
know, it just, as long as you don't shoot me, we're fine.
Okay.
We are in Texas. All right?
Well,
But no, I think we can all agree we are in a golden age.
Yeah,
We're seeing
absolutely.
more different types of artwork. We're seeing more artists, more creators, more titles, and more things than we ever have before.
And more an awareness of an industry that's very much aware of its past, aware of itself and its possibilities. Yeah.
We're also seeing, I think industry growth. We're watching numbers
Yeah.
go up every year, which I think is definitely a sign that we're definitely in that age.
we're also in a phase, I think, also is that the media as a whole, as a genre, it grows and it gets stuck in the collective psyche of modern America, modern world culture as well. Even in this modern, in this digital age, people still want to grab onto the stories of heroes and the good guys and the bad guys, and it means
And the freak guys.
and the free guys,
Yeah.
and the Harvey P. Cars of the world. But yeah, absolutely, we want to grab onto those stories because they give us, I think, not only an escape, but a hope that we can not only do better for ourselves, but do better for the world as a whole.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think so too. One of the things that I think we've noticed a lot too with the things that we publish, we're running into a lot of what we call our generational aspect, where I'll do a strawberry shortcake book, and she just celebrated her 30th anniversary.
She looks good for 30.
Doesn't she? Really good. But what we're really discovering is that I've got mom who will find the book and she'll go, "Oh my God, I remember this, and I've got to have a copy, and I want my daughter to have it too."
Yeah.
So we're seeing now all the people that when I started in this industry 22, 23 years ago, I'm seeing people now that shop, with me as a customer, now are bringing their kids into stores.
That's what I was saying. We grew up,
Yeah, we
and now
grew
we're
up with
passing it on to our kids.
and I think one of the things that we always want to do, as a people and as a culture, is to hand down the thing that we enjoy the most to the next generation, hoping that they'll enjoy it as well.
Carry on the legacy.
Exactly.
Thank God for digital because my kids are going to rip it up.
Yeah, see, I had the same problem. I was like, "Here, Batgirl number 1, rip, okay, it's worthless now. All right, do what you want."
Brett, something that you just said reminds me, I guess, my own experience in terms of my kids. I have had, I haven't been successful in terms of my luck in getting my kids interested in the kind of comics, at least, that I read and that I read growing up. However, what they're interested in is not the kind of comics that I read. They're interested in manga.
Right.
And so, one of the things, that has been absent from today's discussion, but I think that's something that we need to keep in mind as well. I think that one of the things generating quite a bit of interest with younger readers is that the proliferation of manga, not just in comic stores, but I think even maybe more so in bookstores. Because if you go to a Barnes & Noble, if you go to a brick and mortar bookshop that sell a variety of different kind of books, and they have a comic section or a graphic novel section, at least 50-70% of that, the shelf space will be covered with manga, the variety of manga. And I think that is helping to generate interest in other kind of comics. But I know in the case of my kids, they primarily stick with the manga.
Right.
Every now and again they'll venture out into something else. But I think that has something to do with where we are today in our understanding and the growth of comics as well.
I'd love to see us get to a point as a society and with a certain culture, the way the Japanese have, where you go onto a train, people will read manga. Everybody reads manga,
Regardless
and when
of
they're
age.
right, and when they're done with it, they leave it on the seat so that the next person that comes along can pick it up and read
It's like a
it.
newspaper.
Yeah, and I would love to have that pass along for comics, because Because can you imagine
Oh,
what
God.
kind of growth our industry would have if you could walk onto a train or a bus
Mm.
and there's a bin or like by the seat there's just you
Free
pull out a
stuff,
comic,
yeah,
and you
free
start to
stuff.
read it. That would be fantastic.
It's like a waiting room without the crappy magazine.
Yeah.
More manga in doctor's offices.
There
Less
you go.
highlights
There
for
we go. That's
children.
what,
Yeah.
that's what doctors need. Yeah. Put some comic books in there.
Get rid of the highlights, yeah.
Yeah. Screw Goofus and go on. Okay.
Have we reached an end point in our discussion? Because our moderator is busy with
I
customers.
think we have.
Yeah.
I think we have.
Well, gentlemen, I just want to say thank you all. It was an interesting conversation. I enjoyed it thoroughly. Thank you.
Yeah, it is. Very much,
Thank
very
you for
much.
having me. Appreciate it.
And thanks to our vast audience
Yes.
for
Round
sitting
of
in
applause.
and listening to
Let's applaud them.
Thanks to Lone Star.
Thank you,
Oh,
Lone
yes,
Star.
definitely.
Thank you, guys.
Lone Star, definitely. Thank you, guys. Do we get paid now?